now. So Max from Air Max Investigations actually wrote into me recently and said that he would like me to discuss the risk versus reward from a surveillance perspective. And Max was kind enough to put together all of his thoughts for me and a really great visual that I will show shortly. But he says that some investigators only ever think about minimizing risk, but don't take into account that it's part of the job. It's important to stay safe, but taking risks is part of your toolbox as a private investigator. That's half of the reason why it's such an exciting and fun job, because no two jobs are ever the same and there is always an amount of risk. So every surveillance job you do has a risk versus reward ratio and should be considered when you're doing your pre-planning. So depending on how much risk you're willing to take might depend on what rewards you are going to get as a surveillance agent. And Max also mentioned that minimizing risk in the field is typically thought of only when risk presents itself. So if you have been watching someone at their house, the subject has wandered down the street and gone to catch a bus to go into work, and you jump on that bus and follow walking down Queen Street Mall behind them, and they turn around and go, "Hey, are you following me?" And then you're like, "Oh, didn't think about being approached." So it's really important to remember that that is something that can happen. So it's not just thinking that you're doing your job, but also just knowing that funny joke, surely not. So minimizing risks in this field, yes, as I said, typically we only think about it when it presents itself. But don't worry so much when it does happen, because it is part of the job. I actually spoke to Alex Evans, who is one of the surveillance operatives that teaches at the Australian Security Academy. I talked to him today about this at length, and he said that every single surveillance job, you have to weigh up the risk reward ratio, because it happens with every job. With every job, there is risk. And Max also points out that every surveillance job is a fluid situation. And I'm just going to quote Max here saying, well, he said, "Personally, I do not concur that a PI should not take any risks. If they don't, they're probably not doing their job, as some might say. If you keep within the law and don't go in blind, then taking risks is part of your toolbox." So remember that it's not just about minimizing risk, it's about risk itself, because that is part of your job and one of the many things that you can use in your favor. So what are some tips? Oh, sorry, I just wanted to actually show the risk versus reward for surveillance visual that Max sent through. He kindly put this together. It's fantastic. So your risk of detection, and then the investigative technique that you could use that will produce rewards. So obviously, certain techniques that you employ, your risk of detection goes up. So that was a really fantastic visual. Thank you, Max. So some tips for thinking about risk versus reward: embrace risk. Understand that it's part of your job, but make it calculated. And Alex said to me today something that I love, that because we all do it kind of unconsciously, but Alex said, I always think about it in likely versus unlikely. So if I park here, am I likely to be caught, or am I unlikely to be caught? And how much risk is there in being here? So I love that. That's a fantastic thing. And the other thing he said, which is probably my absolute favorite thing, is that you should be discussing the risk with the client so you're both aware and subject to the risk together. So Alex gave me a fantastic example of where a client needed Alex to get a picture of someone getting out of a vehicle, that specific picture. And Alex said to them, well, you realize that that's quite a high risk that I'm going to be caught. And they said, yes, that's the risk that we're willing to take. He got the picture and he also got caught. So that was just a really fantastic example. And Max said also that you should do your own due diligence. So as he points out in his email to me, that people aren't always 100% honest to insurance companies and things like that. So when you get a job, you get part of a story. And it doesn't take long just to have a little bit of a look online, especially if you follow this show. I'm sure you've picked up lots of tips on how to search for people. And yeah, just have a little look yourself. So that was the risk reward talk that I thought we should talk about today. Thank you so much, Max, for sending that in, and Alex for talking to me about it today.
Thank you, Casey. That was wonderful. Really enjoyed that. Thanks, Max.